Hello again, everybody. I'm Jeremiah Ronner, and thank you for listening in to a brand new episode of Deeply Rooted.
Deeply rooted in God's Word. Deeply rooted in God's Word.
Hello, everybody, and welcome again to another episode of Deeply Rooted, wherever you're at and however you may be listening. We appreciate you tuning in. As always, a couple of preliminary things to get out of the way. Make sure you check us out on our Facebook page there at Deeply Rooted. You can like us and follow us on the page as well. You can also access our Messenger app there if you'd like to send us any questions or comments or prayer requests. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. That's Deeply Rooted. All of our previous podcasts are on there. You can check those out if you've missed any of them before, and all the new ones will be there as well. And we also encourage you to check out our iTunes. Make sure you subscribe to that. We appreciate our good friends at Podpoint Ministry being able to make that possible. We really appreciate all the good work that they do. And if you're a local church or if you have a ministry of your own, I highly encourage you to look into them and the good work that they do and the availability that they make things like what we do here at Deeply Rooted possible. Now, having said that, we're actually live on location today at Crossway Baptist Church, and I've got shameless plug here, first cousin and pastor of Crossway Baptist Church, Aaron Eden's here with us, and we want to talk about specifically Bivocational Ministry. So, Aaron, thank you for being a part of the program. I appreciate you being on here today.
Glad to be here.
Now, you're a lifer like I am. You've been in church since you were born. Strong Christian family, strong Christian upbringing, saved at, I believe, 14. Is that right?
Nearly 14.
14. In the high school years, was there any feeling or call to ministry at that time?
Yeah, I guess really when I was a young child, I had a sensitivity to it. I just never knew how to articulate that. But when I became a teenager, it became stronger, and just a sense of knowing that I had some type of job to do, but I did not know what it was.
Where do you think the real set in stone calling came, and when you really announced your call to the ministry? How old were you? Where were you when that happened? I
was 23. I had been a youth leader for a couple of years, but the clarity of the call really started increasing then. I saw what I could do, what my gifting was, and I actually went on a trip. We went up north to visit some family up there, and while we were there, some of those folks actually referred to me as a preacher. I'd never announced that I was a preacher or anything like that, but they called me that. And sometime, too, around that time, I had been in a service, and a strange thing happened. My mom and dad and I, we sang in a church service. In a small church, there were probably less than 20 people there. And there was an old-time preacher there. His name was Milligan Heron. And he got up to preach, and as he preached, in the middle of the message, he seemingly stopped and looked right at me and said, "If you feel like you should preach, go ahead and do it. That's the truth." And then he went right back to his message. So all that was in my mind. But while we were up north, we met up with your mom and dad and the rest of our family, and we went to Virginia Beach for a time. And one day, while everybody else went on a deep sea fishing trip, by myself there, I committed to the call. When I came back home, I kept it to myself. I was kind of formulating a plan of what I was going to do, because I wanted to preach, but I knew there would be no available pulpit. And so I had formulated a plan that I was going to start a radio broadcast, and the rest is history.
What was the biggest worry or hang up?
Well, the circle of influence that I was in at that time. A testimony like mine usually did not lend itself to being a preacher. I had no dramatic story to tell. I had no great sins to confess. So I knew there would be some resistance. I was also young, and I knew there would be resistance there as well. So that was part of it.
Now, on the flip side of that, who would have been your biggest influence, though, during that time? Really, and full disclosure, you sent me these questions ahead of time, so I've thought about this. This is the way I would answer that question. I had a lot of personal influence from people in my family, and then people that I was in church with, and some local preachers. I admired what they did. But really, to answer that question honestly, I think I'd have to say that, and I know how this sounds, but Dr. Billy Graham and Dr. J. Vernon McGee are my biggest influences, then and now. Yeah.
And I think that'll hold true probably the rest of my life.
Well, a lot like those two men, you started out in what I guess we would classify as evangelism.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like you said, you never filled any major pulpit as far as that went, and pastored. And you also mentioned you took on the radio ministry, and I do remember you had a chance to go on some foreign missions as well. What about all that helped shape where you were going at that time?
The mission trip was really helpful to me because it brought into perspective something that I knew, but it made it more real, and that is the gospel is not a Southwest Virginia, Northeast Tennessee invention. People don't realize it, but they inherently have a bias that the way we do things is the only way it can be done.
Right.
But the gospel started over in the Middle East, and people do things differently everywhere, but God's people are God's people, and the gospel works everywhere, and it worked in Jamaica. And those people were totally different than us. The way they sang, the way they worshiped. Service time might be 7 o'clock, they might arrive at 8. But when they got there, they were ready to worship. So it really helped me see how, not to be so closed-minded about ministry and about preaching, though I still was to a large degree. The radio was one of the best things I ever did. It disciplined me. I had to be ready every Sunday. It taught me to preach in series, and it helped me develop confidence as a speaker and as a preacher. I loved it then. I love it. I would do it now. I'm not so sure that I won't wind back up doing that in some way. So it forced me. I knew every week I had an appointment, and it was live. So you had to be ready, and that was a great blessing.
Did that help you network along with, I know you and your mom and dad, they've sang for years, did that help you network with other pastors to get opportunities in different churches?
In a limited way. We sang everywhere, all over Scott County and the area. That helped. But the radio did help me make some contacts, and I remember, and I'm honored to say this, one day I was in my apartment. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I received a phone call, and it was Rightly Salling. And I will say Rightly Salling's a hero of mine. And he asked me to come to his church and preach. I was shocked that, number one, he had listened to me because he told me he listened to me. And that, number two, he asked me to come. So it did open some doors. Not a lot, but some.
Now, how old were you when you took your first, I guess, full-time position in a church in some capacity?
25. 25.
Now, was that an associate pastor position?
Assistant pastor.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know what the difference is in assistant and associate. I hear both titles flung around. Some people think there's a difference. I don't know. But we labeled me assistant pastor up at Victory Baptist.
And how long did you keep that position?
I went there in 2001, and I left in 2005. So I was there, I think it's about 4.5 years.
So in 2005, is that when you took your first pastor position as senior pastor?
No, I felt led to resign there and go back to evangelism, and that's what I did. So we resigned. I told them then, and I mean this now, I came there as their friend. I left as their friend. They prayed for us and supported us as we left, and I went, and we based out of Oak Glen Baptist Church for a time there, and I went everywhere and preached. And I did, at that time, I started preaching a lot more, at least 3 times a week, and then revivals and stuff too.
Now you mentioned us, so it was during that time that you were married, and you had Eli, your son. Was that during that same time period or a little bit later?
Well, we married in 2001 when I first went to Victory, and we didn't have Eli until 2008. So there was a transition when we got married. That was a blessing. Of course, my family, my mom and dad, and then my whole family supported me when I started, but you know, to have my wife with me made a big difference. So she was there from 2001 onward.
Now, did that change your pace, though, at that time? Were you still going as much as you ever had?
No, I still went as much as ever, because it was just, you know, she and I.
Right. Now, how did you balance, though, once married and then you've got your son, how do you balance all that family time and ministry time at that point?
Well, from 05 to 07, as I said, I did what I would call evangelistic work and pulpit supply, and I did revivals and so forth for a couple of years. So then I accepted a position at Sloantown Community Church, and when I went there, the radio it was too much to do that, plus 3 times a week, plus we were expecting a child. And I left the radio ministry at that point in time. So that was a break for me, really. And, you know, for me, God made the family before He made the church. So my family comes first. And I've stated that publicly, and I will state it again, that my family does come first. So, you know, there has to be a balance, and I like to think that I do that as good as I can. Joanna understands that there's times I have to go to the hospital or I have to go to someone's home. Sometimes people call. It may be a long conversation. She understands that. Eli's got a working knowledge of that too, but really, it's never really interfered greatly in our family life so far. So we've managed it pretty well.
Now, mentioning all that, and I still think people are a little aloof to this, and that's with a full-time job.
Yes.
Because you were working and still work at Eastman Chemical Company and having to balance family, work, and ministry. Really quickly, explain to the audience what bivocational ministry means.
Well, the prefix bi means 2, so it's 2 vocations. I despise the term lay preacher. I'm a preacher.
Right.
I despise the term part-time preacher. I'm a preacher 24/7, but I'm bivocational. In other words, I have my own means of income through public work.
Why bivocational and not, and again, we'll just throw that term full-time out there, simply meaning that would be your only means of income. Why bivocation and not full-time ministry?
The number one reason is, and this is a simple answer if you think about it, nobody's ever offered me a full-time job. I should clarify that. I have had overtures made to me about positions that would have been full-time, but I didn't pursue that. And that was before I even started pastoring. I was just evangelizing really at that time. So But other than I've never really had a formal offer. If I did, I would pray about it. But when you are bivocational, you have to learn time management. And you have to learn how to cut the fluff and get to the point of everything. Your messages and everything you do in life, you have to learn, hey, boil it down to the simplest element, get done what needs to be done, because as a bivocational preacher, I'm never off. It's 7 days a week.
Right.
I work 5. Saturday, Sunday's looming in my mind, and Sunday I work. So when you're bivocational, and there are many men in this area that are, it's busy. It's busy.
Well, you look at the model in the Bible, practically every great preacher was bivocational. They all had what we would call a real life out there that they had to handle with a real family, ups and downs, and they ministered and they traveled. So it's not a foreign concept, it's not a new concept. You've touched on a little bit of it. What do you think the biggest advantage of being bivocational is?
Well, I've been blessed to pastor good people who have supported me, and I have been free from a lot of controversy. Sometimes preachers run into that. Well, if you are full-time and you run into that, well, your income's at stake. Well, in the case I'm in now, should the church, this Sunday say, hey, we've had enough, I would not like that, but I still have insurance and I still have a job. Right. So, and that sounds like a cop-out to some people, but I want to say this on this podcast. I don't know how many people will hear me say this.
Tens, I'm sure.
Yeah, the typical audience that my ministry has. What I would say is, when it comes to preaching, as I said, I despise the term part-time. I am full-time, and I understand what you mean. I understand the context of the word, but I can preach the word, and if people don't like it, they're not paying the bills. And if they say you're gone, I'm gone, but I still have insurance and a job. And I feel like, and I would say this to any young man, my job, first of all, as a man in the Scripture, is to make sure my wife and son are taken care of. And I do that. So I don't have the worry of, well, if they get aggravated or mad or there's a split, my salary will be taken away. I don't have to worry about that. So that's a plus. Another plus is when you are bivocational, there's a lot of money that the church can use for church work. I do have a salary. Most bivocationals do. But I'm not given a salary like I would if I was full-time. Like if a person's full-time, they're going to need insurance. They're going to need a retirement. They're going to need something to live on from week to week. But if you're bivocational, the church then is free to use that money for missions, for local projects, for the light bill, etc. So when I look in the Word, and I actually just taught on this the other night concerning the Corinthian church. When the Corinthian church was established and Paul went to Corinth, he joined up with Priscilla and Aquila. They were of the same trade. They were tent makers. And then on the Sabbath day, Paul went to the synagogue to reason with the Jews in the synagogue. So the pattern was he worked through the week, and then on the Sabbath day, he went and did his thing. It is not wrong to be full-time, but if Paul can make tents, I can. So I think there's a good scriptural precedent for it. Some people look down on bivocational ministry. They think you're not sold out completely to your call. To me, that's foolish. Some people could not do what God wants them to do if they had a full-time job. For instance, I mentioned Dr. Billy Graham. He could not have held a job.
Right.
He had a call that superseded any public work. At present, I don't. So I guess what I'm getting at is there's pros and cons to it, but at the same time, people are different, have different callings. And on my public job, I have had an opportunity to meet people, to influence people, and be influenced by people that I wouldn't have otherwise if I was in a study somewhere 40 hours a week.
Right. What do you think the drawbacks are then of bivocation, if you had to pick out a few?
Well, I'm not in a study 40 hours a week. The biggest strength I have is time management. Mm-hmm. I know how to manage time. I know how to make use of time. If I didn't, I'd be hurting. So I would, if you're full-time, you do have more time to devote to spiritual matters, visiting, praying, thinking. I mean, there's a lot to be said for just reading the Bible casually and thinking. You don't have as much time to do that if you're working full-time. So that is a drawback. I would love to have time to write more and really push myself and see how much I could do. I'd like to do that, but I don't have the time because there's full-time work, and then there's practice, and there's ball games, and there's this, and there's that. And sometimes I like to sit down and watch TV. My wife will say, yeah, he does like to sit down and watch TV. So, that's the drawback. You don't have that time. And like for funerals, I have to rearrange my schedule. I've had to take unpaid days of vacation at times. People don't think about that. I was actually, one year I was out of vacation. So I had to take off unpaid to do a funeral, and you take off a day unpaid and drive 40 miles to do one. it's a chore. So, but if I'd been full time, I would have been off. And I think there's been instances too where people maybe hadn't understood that I've had more than one funeral in a week requested of me. And when you have limited vacation and you got multiple funerals in the same week, and you have deadlines on your job and expectations, sometimes something has to give. Somebody else may have to do a funeral. So most of the time, 99.99% of my ministry, people have understood the man works full time. Sometimes I don't think people have, but it's been very rare.
Do you think time management is the one thing people don't give enough credit to in bivocation ministry?
Yes. As I told you earlier, I'm never off. So I'm always on.
Right.
And I'm having to manage that time, to make sure I get the most out of it.
Now, practically speaking, talk a little bit about your weekly routine. You're getting ready. You talked about you come off of Sunday, Monday morning hits, you're back to work. How are you getting ready for services coming up?
Well, that's changed over the years. When I first started, I thought I had to have every commentary out every time I studied, every dictionary. But I don't. To manage time, instead of doing all that, I really narrowed it down to there's good websites now that have good commentaries and good word studies. BibleHub.com is very good for that. So I can use that much quicker than I could looking through other. And don't misunderstand me, I don't preach commentary. But I use commentary to help me get some context and insight to the setting of a passage I'm going to preach from. So that's helped me manage time, and that's helped me prepare easier. So, I'll use that website, and as I said, when I first started, it was a lot more, I stressed over it a lot more because I always felt judged when I preached and compared. I don't worry about that at all now. I'm me, and so they're going to get me. That's all I can give them. So from week to week, it's not as stressful as it was in my preparation now, and I hate to say this because it's going to sound so cliched, but I am led by the Spirit more than I ever was before. And I think that just comes with time. And how am I led by the Spirit? I constantly listen to preaching. All preachers should listen to preaching. Mm-hmm. I constantly listen to preaching from a wide variety. I listen to Baptists, I listen to Pentecostals, I listen to Charismatics, Presbyterians, etc. It's not to say I believe and agree with everything I hear, but different perspectives help you. And as you hear people preach, it challenges you. And then oftentimes I'll think about another passage or another topic, or just maybe one little line they say might spur a thought in my mind. And then just casually reading the Bible, not reading for a sermon, but reading for myself. And God speaks to me. And through all that, I'm led a certain way. And so I can't really give a hard and fast rule to how I prepare, because sometimes I've had messages come to me on Saturday instantly, and that would supersede anything I'd studied on. I knew I had to preach it. Sometimes I know ahead of time, 3 or 4 weeks, I'm going to preach this, then I'm going to preach that, then I'm going to preach that. So it's different for me. I don't know how other people do it. I mean, I have friends who have told me that they have a preaching calendar. And I know a lot of the big timers do, a preaching calendar, and they actually are booked out for 52 weeks as to what they're going to preach. I cannot do that. I'm not saying that is wrong. That's the way they do it. I can't do that. So that's a long roundabout way of saying I'm off the cuff. But I'm not unprepared. And for you 10 people listening, if there's any preachers, never go anywhere unprepared. If I come to this church to preach and there's 10 people, they deserve the best. If there's 500, they deserve the best. So while I am extemporaneous and off the cuff to a degree, I'm not unprepared. I'm always ready and trying to be sensitive to the Spirit. I'm in a great series right now that I've enjoyed so much, and I had no plans of it. It wasn't even on my mind. But I preached Mother's Day on She Stood concerning Mary. And it's just like the Lord told me, great women in the Bible, preach on them. And I started studying that way. That's how it goes for me now. It's a lot easier than it used to be.
Now, you told me years ago a good piece of advice: never throw anything away.
Right.
Do you go back and listen to yourself or read notes from the past to not necessarily preach on again, but to critique yourself? Do you listen to yourself often?
I do not listen to myself because I always feel like, well, I know what I'm going to say because I was there. So I never listen, but I do. And I don't even look back at old notes as much as I used to. I used to do that a lot. I don't even do that as much anymore. Though I do still keep everything. Everything's pretty much on a Word file, or I have physical files too of notes.
Do you write a lot down in the week and take it up with you to the pulpit, or you mainly know what you want to speak on and studied it out thorough? And
that depends too. The nature of the message.
Yeah.
There's sometimes I feel like I need to be really articulate in what I say to make sure that I get it across. And sometimes I just rear back and preach.
Now, what advice would you give to some young man just getting into ministry, whether it be evangelism or they've taken a position, or particularly somebody young that hasn't had a lot of chances yet?
I told you this a long time ago, whether you remember it or not, and I think this a lot. I still think this myself. I would say saturate your mind with the New Testament. You cannot read it too much. It disturbs me to see people try to preach that obviously have not attempted to learn basically what the Bible says. The best thing that I ever did as a teenage boy was saturate my mind with the New Testament. Over and over, I read it. That makes studying much easier, much easier. So that would be my advice. Don't waste the time. When I first started, I thought, man, nobody will ask me to preach. Nobody knows who I am. I'll preach on the radio and do the best I can. And initially, it would be one appointment a month maybe, or one every 2 or 3 months. Well, if you're like that and you're just starting out, study. Because I'm gonna make this statement too. If you're called, you'll have an opportunity. It'll come.
Right.
It will come. Just be patient. So, saturation of your mind with the New Testament will help any young preacher.
Now, what about the man in similar shoes as you in a small congregation, maybe in this area, that's a little discouraged by where they're at, as whether it be number or involvement? What do you say to that guy who's also bivocational?
Yeah, that's a tough situation, but I'll carefully choose my words. It's easy to sit and think about what you should be doing. And I've had people tell me, if you put yourself out there, you could do this. You could go there. So it's easy to have those thoughts run through your mind. But this is something I tell myself a lot. It's not about the quantity. It's about the quality of ministry. If you look in the New Testament in Acts chapter number 8, Philip was in a tremendous revival. People were being saved right and left. Suddenly, in the midst of that move of God, God called him from the multitude to one man. And we read that story and rejoice in it because he went and he saw the Ethiopian eunuch and that man was saved. So what I would say is to that one that feels like he's struggling, and I'd say this to myself, I'd say this to any preacher, let's focus on that one. The multitudes we may or may not be able to ever speak to, but we've had some tremendous individual testimonies here at Crossway over the past few years that have really blessed me and let me know that it's worth it. Don't get discouraged. Every little bit does matter.
What's the best piece of ministry advice you've ever gotten?
Grow the people, not the church. I still think about it. Dr. Bob Sanders told me that many years ago. It's true. I mean, the fact is, church in Southwest Virginia and Northeast Tennessee, we're watching it change right before our eyes. We have a generation of people who have passed on, and those that are still here are having to deal with dramatic change. People aren't hanging out the windows. People aren't beating down the door to get in. So things are changing, and if you start worrying about growing the multitude, it'll drive you crazy. But I worry about growing the people. And then when you grow the people, the multitude can grow on its own, however fast God wants it to grow.
Now, you mentioned a period of change right now, and I'd have to agree with that. Where do you see Bivocational Ministry going in the future? Maybe in this area and even nationwide, because there's obviously thousands of men out there that are doing this in our country that are going week to week and doing the best they can. Where do you see that going over the next 10, 20, 30 years?
I don't know. I couldn't say anything hard and fast, but if you look at the numbers, and I saw some research the other day, I can't remember the numbers to quote them, but churches are closing left and right, sadly. And we mistakenly think that only small churches are closing. All kinds of churches are closing, and all kinds of denominations. So with that being said, bivocational ministry could be something that happens more and more because the size of churches to be able to staff someone a full-time position, I'm not so sure that there'll be churches of that size to handle a full-time person. So bivocational may increase more and more. And one thing I am reminded of, and nobody ever preaches this or talks about it, but in the New Testament, I just mentioned a few moments ago Priscilla and Aquila. They had a church in their house. When you look at the social landscape of America, what's popular and what's prominent, Bible preaching is less and less popular and less favored. And we may see a day where people actually are meeting in homes instead of buildings. So that could be a long-term thing. I don't know. I hope not. But evil men and seducers will wax worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived, and there will be a great falling away, and we're seeing that now.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we can maintain our tens and tens of audiences regardless of what may happen. But we appreciate you being candid. We appreciate the interview. I think people will really get a lot out of that. I encourage young ministers, old ministers, everybody in between, please listen to this. Take some time out of your day and heed some of this advice that we've heard. And for those that in congregations, I think you'd learn a lot about this, particularly from a pastor's point of view, things that you can pray for them about, things that you can encourage them about. And so lots to learn from this, but we appreciate Brother Aaron being on here today. We're going to come back in just a few minutes with some closing announcements, so hang tight and we'll be right back. All right, we're back again with some closing announcements. Again, we appreciate Brother Aaron being here with us today. We're going to let him give you some information about Crossway Baptist Church, how you can locate them, and some of the events that they've got coming up. So, Aaron, why don't you go ahead and let the audience know what they can be expecting out of Crossway Baptist?
Okay, Crossway Baptist, first of all, we're located on 695 Park Street, Gate City. That's out on the west end of Gate City. If you come through Gate City and past the high school, go on up and take the second red light in Gate City and make a left. You'll come out to the west end, you'll pass the life-saving crew, and eventually you'll see us on the left. We've got upcoming, we're going to have a one-day combined Bible school with Midfield Free Will Baptist Church. That's on June 22nd. That is at their church. I don't have the exact address, but they have a website, Midfield Free Will Baptist Church. Brother Josh McKinney is the pastor, and that will be June the 22nd, 10:30 to 1:30. The theme is Take the Plunge. So remember that this upcoming Saturday. And then on the 23rd, the Crystal River Boys from Johnson City will be with us in the morning service. On the 30th, the Heavenly Reflections from out at Blair's Gap, they'll be here. in the morning service, and then moving on into July, in my absence, Brother Don McCann, and some of you may know Brother McCann. He will be here to preach in the morning service on July the 7th, and then Jeremiah will be preaching that evening. But that's kind of what we've got coming up here in the next little bit. We do have a Facebook page, and I'd encourage you to check that out. I'm trying to post on there myself more and have a little bit of a presence on it myself, but on the Facebook page we do update, what's coming up, what's going on. And our morning service is always recorded, and you can find our podcast there on Crossway's Facebook page. So I'd encourage you to check that out. We're on there every week with a new message, and hope it'll be a blessing to you.
So 10 o'clock Sunday school each Sunday morning?
Yes, Sunday school at 10 o'clock. We have an adult class, and then we have a smaller class for children. Really, the starting age is really around 2-ish on up to about 12, and then we have a class for 12 and up, and then an adult class. And Sunday school starts at 10. Worship starts promptly at 11. Sunday nights at 6. And on Wednesday, we have a second and fourth Wednesday prayer meeting. It is not every Wednesday. Second and fourth Wednesday of the month at 7 o'clock, we have prayer meeting, and you're invited to any or all those services.
All right, so if you're in the area, make sure you try to check them out here. Come on out and visit. We'd love to see you around. We'd love to fellowship with you. We'd love to see you and worship with us as well. So again, we say big thanks to Brother Aaron and his work here at Crossway Baptist and what they're doing in this community and the dedication that they have. So until next time, we hope you have a great week in the Lord, and God bless.
Deeply rooted in God's word. Deeply rooted in God.